September 1944. The European landscape was burning. From the shattered ruins of France to the battered forests of Belgium, war thundered like a storm that refused to end. The German army, once feared and relentless, was now retreating through the smoldering remains of its conquests. The Allies were advancing, faster, stronger, and with an endless stream of tanks, trucks, and planes that seemed to materialize out of thin air. But for one German officer, a weary, battle-hardened colonel, the reality of defeat came not from a bullet, nor a bombing raid, but from a discovery so ordinary, yet so monumental, it shattered his belief in victory forever. Somewhere near the Meuse River, his troops stumbled upon a captured American fuel depot. 50,000 gallons of high-grade gasoline, guarded by only a few frightened U.S. soldiers who had been cut off during the chaos of the Allied push east. For a brief moment, the colonel's men rejoiced. It was a treasure. Fuel, the lifeblood of modern warfare. In a world where German tanks often sat idle for lack of a single gallon, this was salvation. They could move, fight, perhaps even survive another day. But as the colonel surveyed the massive depot, its endless rows of drums, neatly labeled, perfectly supplied, and only one among thousands like it across Europe, he began to understand something devastating. Germany, he realized, wasn't fighting the Allies anymore. It was fighting time, logistics, and industrial reality. In that moment, standing beside the captured American fuel, Colonel Hans Kruger, a fictional composite inspired by real German officers who served during the final months of the war, understood that the Third Reich's dream of victory was nothing more than smoke and ashes. This is the story of how one man's brief triumph over the enemy became his most haunting defeat. A story of steel, fuel, and the cold arithmetic of war. And how, in the dying months of 1944, the discovery of 50,000 gallons of fuel made a German colonel realize that Germany was already doomed. By the autumn of 1944, the tide of World War II had fully turned. The D-Day landings had shattered Hitler's Atlantic Wall. France had been liberated, and Allied forces were pressing toward Germany's borders. The Luftwaffe was crippled. German armor divisions, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, were shadows of their former strength, starved of both fuel and spare parts. Every tank that rolled required not just courage, but the miracle of finding gasoline. The Allied air forces had long learned that to stop the German war machine, you didn't need to destroy every tank. You only needed to starve them of the oil that made them move. Meanwhile, across Europe, Allied supply convoys thundered down newly built roads in endless lines. Trucks, jeeps, and tankers carried supplies from Normandy's beaches to the front lines with a precision that astonished even their own commanders. It was called the Red-Ball Express, a vast logistical network that moved nearly 12,000 tons of supplies every single day. For the Germans, watching this mechanized miracle unfold was like witnessing the gods of industry at work. Colonel Kruger had fought since 1939. From the lightning strikes of Poland to the brutal winters of the Eastern Front, he had seen victory turn into survival, and survival turn into desperation. His unit, a Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion, had been retreating from France, scavenging for fuel wherever it could be found. So when his scouts reported an abandoned U.S. fuel depot in Belgium, it felt like divine intervention. They attacked swiftly, capturing it almost without resistance. 50,000 gallons of pure American fuel, an amount that could keep an entire division moving for days. His men cheered, singing old marching songs, refueling their trucks, even dreaming of counterattacks. But Kruger was quiet. He knew this single depot meant nothing compared to the industrial ocean behind it. The Americans could replace it by morning. The Germans, on the other hand, could not replace anything. For the first time, the colonel allowed himself to see the truth. Germany's problem was no longer the enemy in front of them. It was the emptiness behind them. At the heart of World War II lay one unshakable truth. Modern warfare ran on fuel. Tanks, Trucks, ships, and planes were no longer driven by men's will alone. They were powered by oil. In 1939, Germany entered the war with one critical weakness. It had no major natural oil reserves. The Reich depended heavily on synthetic fuel made from coal, a complex and expensive process that could never keep up with wartime demand. By contrast, the Allies had access to the vast oil fields of Texas, the Middle East, and the Soviet Union. For every gallon the Germans produced, the Allies could produce 10. In 1942 and 1943, the Allies began targeting Germany's synthetic fuel plants in a campaign of systematic bombing. The skies over Ploiești, Luna, and Buna were filled with smoke and fire as U.S. bombers struck refineries that once powered the panzer divisions. By 1944, those strikes were devastatingly effective. The Luftwaffe couldn't fly enough to defend the Reich. Tanks were hidden in forests, their crews waiting for supplies that never arrived. Even the mighty Tiger tanks, symbols of German engineering, were often abandoned, not destroyed, simply because they ran out of fuel. That's why the capture of 50,000 gallons of U.S. gasoline seemed like a miracle. To Kruger's men, it was as if fate had thrown them a lifeline. But Kruger knew the larger truth. He remembered the fuel convoys he'd seen from afar in France, columns of American trucks stretching beyond the horizon. He'd heard captured Allied soldiers boast of how fuel flowed like water for them, how they never ran short, how the Americans could burn more fuel in a single day than an entire German division used in a week. The German war machine had been built for lightning wars, blitzkrieg, fast, decisive strikes that ended before resources ran dry. But as the war dragged into its 5th year, the lightning had dimmed. Germany was bleeding, and its lifeblood, fuel, was running out. Kruger understood that Germany was now fighting a war it could no longer sustain. Not because its soldiers lacked courage, but because its engines were dying. The discovery came at dawn. Kruger's battalion, retreating through the Ardennes forest, stumbled upon a small village where an American convoy had been ambushed days earlier. Scattered trucks, burned-out jeeps, and crates of supplies littered the muddy road. But beyond the village, his scouts found something extraordinary. A vast field lined with metal drums, neatly stacked under camouflage netting. They crept closer. The smell hit them first, sharp, unmistakable. Gasoline. 50,000 gallons, reported one of his engineers, eyes wide with disbelief. Colonel, it's all here. Fuel for tanks, trucks, everything. The colonel ordered the perimeter secured. A few captured U.S. soldiers, terrified, cold, and exhausted, were brought before him. They explained it was a temporary depot, part of the Allied advanced supply system. More were being built every week. That was the moment the realization began. His men celebrated, of course. They refueled, cleaned weapons, and laughed for the first time in weeks. But Kruger walked alone through the rows of fuel drums, reading the neat American stencils, property numbers, delivery dates, and distribution units. Each marking told a story of organization, of abundance. These weren't isolated stockpiles. They were part of a machine, vast and unstoppable. As night fell, Kruger stood by a burning barrel, watching the flames dance against the steel containers. In that moment he understood something chilling. The Allies' greatest weapon wasn't the Sherman tank, nor the P-51 Mustang. It was the system that fed them. The Americans could lose a depot like this and never notice. Germany could gain it and still not win. He thought of the young men under his command, boys who still believed in victory. He couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. But deep down, he knew it was over. Weeks later, that truth would echo across Europe in the form of the Battle of the Bulge, when Hitler gambled what remained of his army on one final offensive. The entire plan depended on capturing Allied fuel. Without it, even victory would collapse. Kruger's captured depot became a grim prophecy. Germany could win battles, but without fuel, It could no longer win wars. As December 1944 arrived, the colonel's fears came true. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last desperate push, was built entirely around seizing Allied fuel depots. German tanks raced forward, but every mile consumed more gasoline they didn't have. Soldiers captured American fuel trucks, drained them dry, and kept moving. But it wasn't enough. Within days, the offensive stalled. The same miracle that had once blessed Kruger's battalion became the obsession of the entire Wehrmacht: fuel. Every German division was fighting not just the enemy, but the empty gauge of its own fuel tank. When the offensive failed, Kruger watched his men abandon their vehicles and march on foot through snow and fire. The captured depot was long gone, destroyed in an airstrike. He finally said the words aloud to his adjutant: "Even when we win, we lose. The Americans have oceans of oil. We have drops." It was the day he stopped believing in victory. By early 1945, Germany's armies were collapsing on every front. Allied bombers darkened the skies. Soviet tanks roared in from the east. Fuel depots, factories, and rail lines were nothing but smoking ruins. Kruger's battalion, reduced to a few trucks and men, surrendered near the Rhine in March. When questioned by Allied officers, he spoke calmly about the war's final months. He didn't speak of ideology or politics, only logistics. "The moment I saw your fuel depot," he said, "I knew we had lost. It wasn't your guns that defeated us. It was your factories, your roads, your oil." History remembers great battles and heroic stands. But wars are often decided by invisible forces, by fuel lines, railways, and the simple ability to keep engines running. Colonel Kruger's story is a microcosm of Germany's ultimate downfall. For all its tactical brilliance and technological innovation, the Third Reich could not escape the arithmetic of production. When the colonel realized that 50,000 gallons of fuel meant nothing in the grand scope of Allied supply, he was witnessing the moment where industrial power triumphed over ideology. It was not courage or cunning that won World War II. It was the relentless, mechanical rhythm of logistics. The war ended months later. Germany lay in ruins, its cities flattened, its dreams extinguished. Colonel Kruger disappeared into history, one among millions swallowed by defeat. But his realization, the truth that wars are not only fought by soldiers but by the factories, refineries, and supply lines that sustain them, remains timeless. The capture of 50,000 gallons of U.S. fuel did not save Germany. It revealed its doom. If you found this story of war, strategy, and human realization compelling, subscribe for more true historical documentaries that uncover the moments when history changed forever.